I look for signs all the time. And this is what I feel is my job to do as a radio host and a television host is you're busy, you have jobs. It's my job to do the homework. It's not your job. And so I look for stuff. I look for signs. I look for trends. I wrote both my books talking about trends in sports. So has anybody else noticed, and you probably haven't because you're not paid to pay attention to this stuff, the last 2 years right before the tournament, what John Calipari's done at Kentucky? Have you noticed? You haven't. I have. Here we go. So right before the tournament last year, I've got the article here, March 5th last year, right before the tournament, John Calipari came on this show. And for the first time ever, he said, quote, "It's not my job to win the national title. That's not my number one job." What? Well, they kind of paid you at Kentucky to win national title. Not my number one job, said Calipari right before the tournament last year. He said, my job is to prepare these kids for life. Interesting. Interesting. That's not why they're paying you, Coach, and you know it. I love the Mother Teresa altruism here. They're paying you to win tournaments, championships. This is Kentucky. Same at USC. They're paying Clay Helton to win national titles, not win the Pac-12. This is Kentucky basketball. So right before the tournament last year, what does he do? Softens the blow if he loses. Well, what did he do yesterday, second year in a row? What did Calipari do again? Yesterday comes out and says, I don't like the way they seed the tournament. I don't like the way they seed it. They should just do an S-curve, number one team, 2, 3, 4, 5. Back-to-back years, John Calipari is now feeling the heat. Because we all know the story with Calipari, and we all know the story with Kentucky. It's a basketball factory. Kentucky is arguably the greatest program of all time. They do not settle for SEC championships. Kentucky aims for a national championship, and he's been now there 8 years. He's got one. And Calipari has told people close to him he needs a second. Oh, they're not going to fire him. But Calipari is going to start feeling like Caliponzi if he doesn't start winning another title. Oh, it's going to feel like that. The return's not quite what we paid for. Caliponzi. Calipari has always been known as the best salesman in college basketball. Nobody's ever thought schematically he's Izzo, Bill Self, Coach K. And although they dominate the SEC, he's got two things working against him. Mike Krzyzewski's got 5 titles at Duke. Calipari's got 1 in 8 years as the number one basketball recruiting factory in the country. And he's also got Nick Saban working against him. In the same 8 years, he's got 4 national titles and a play away from 5. And in football, you shouldn't dominate like that because you have to deal with regulated violence. Basketball is not a sport of attrition. Football is. So between Coach K at Duke, 5 titles, and Nick Saban dominating in the southern part of the country, the 2 rock stars are Calipari and Saban just keeps giving you wins and titles, and Calipari is sitting there, and he knows for the second straight year, right before the tournament, I'm looking at the date of that story last year, and I'm looking at the date today. Right before the tournament, Calipari softens the blow. It's not about me winning championships here. Coach, love you. It is. And you would not think the difference between 1 championship and 2 is a big deal. But I've used this example 100 times. Sometimes the difference between 1 and 2 is massive. Children. The difference between having a baby and having 2 babies, go ask parents. That extra set of legs, that extra feeding, the difference between a baby and 2 babies as a parent is everything. I use this with DUIs. If you're a 50-year-old guy with a DUI, you could say Bob made a terrible mistake. If you get a second, you're an alcoholic. You go from a mistake to a disease with 1 pullover on a freeway. Calipari has a title in 8 years, but this is Kentucky. He's got his hookup with Worldwide Wes. Google it if you don't know who he is. This is the basketball factory in America. The standards are simply higher. And Calipari knows, and for the second straight year, right before the tournament, it's not about winning the tournament. I don't like the way the seeding is. Calipari's feeling the heat. Dean Smith is one of the all-time great Southern gentlemen. But Dean Smith, for years and years, couldn't win. And it was the knock on him. Then he won one with Jordan. And everybody said, okay, but it was Michael Jordan. It wasn't until the second championship Dean Smith was not just a Southern legend, he was a legend. Calipari's at Kentucky, man. This isn't Gonzaga. This isn't even Arizona or Michigan State. This is Kentucky. If Nick Saban was 8 years in and had one title, that's not good enough. Clay Helton can win 12 Pac-12 titles. He's got to win a national title, or it's not good enough. The standard is different at Kentucky. And for the second straight tournament, John, right before the tournament, comes out with a quote, either criticizing or apologizing or rationalizing. And we're noticing. For the record, I think Kentucky's good, but I don't think they're good enough to win the championship. All right, here's my second takeaway. And I do think, I think by and large, the people who run this thing do a really good job. I think they do a really good job. But I saw this, is that in my adult life, there's only been 2 college sports programs, and I'm talking the big sports, not college baseball, lacrosse. I'm talking like college football, college basketball. There was Notre Dame in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, and there's Duke basketball now. That when you say Duke basketball, it represents more than really good basketball. Like if you say Kansas basketball, or North Carolina basketball, or Syracuse basketball, or even Kentucky basketball, it just symbolizes great basketball. But if you say Notre Dame in the 70s or Duke now, it symbolizes far more than just basketball. Like Notre Dame in the 70s, Duke represents excellence, success, power, and privilege. And that's why certain brands and very few do that. That's what Mercedes-Benz is. They're not just a car. You say Mercedes-Benz and you think of elite. American Express is not just a credit card. Visa is a great credit card. MasterCard's a great. Citibank. But you say American Express and you think of global travel. You think of finance. Is that every year I hear about what a great seeding Duke gets and how the NCAA favors Duke. Folks, there's a percentage of people in this country who resent success. And when anybody comes up to you and rips Duke, it says nothing about Duke. It says everything about that person. Duke does not get favors. Sorry, hate to break it to you, degenerate gamblers. I heard people yesterday saying, well, it looks like they could play their regional final in New York City. Might as well be a home game. Yes, and when the Pittsburgh Steelers travel, sometimes even in Arizona, it feels like a home game. When the Dallas Cowboys travel, sometimes even outside of their region, it feels like a home game. And when Duke basketball plays, sometimes in New York City or in Minneapolis, or if they played in Seattle in the regional final, it would feel like a home game for Duke. That's what happens when you have a 30-year brand of excellence. Whenever I hear about, oh, the tournament favors Duke, if the tournament favors Duke, then why are they a 2 seed this morning and yet the odds-on favorite to win in Vegas? Why would that be? Vegas only cares about money. Vegas is like, that's the team that's going to win it. Yet the people that run this tournament have Duke as a 2 seed in a pretty tough bracket that includes Villanova and Marquette. And by the way, I'll give you my upset of the tournament in the first weekend. Wisconsin's going to beat Villanova. You heard it here first. So my 2 takeaways today is John Calipari, for the second straight year, is softening the blow if he loses. He is starting to feel the heat in Kentucky, which standards are so high that 1 tournament in 8 years, 1 title, is not good enough. And between Krzyzewski's presence and Saban's presence in the South, Calipari's feeling it. That's why I keep softening the blow. My second takeaway is everybody always says Duke this and Duke that. Vegas has them as a favorite, and yet they're a 2 seed. And if you think that having them play potentially a regional final in New York is playing to Duke, understand that when you have a brand as big as Duke, and they're the most hated team, and the reason they're the most hated team, because people generally aren't polarized by Kansas basketball. You either love Kansas basketball or you're indifferent. You either love Carolina basketball or you're indifferent. With Duke, you love them or hate them. And that's all about the power of their brand. When you say Duke basketball, you don't even just think, When I say Kentucky, I think bourbon and hoops. When I think Duke, I think success. And there's just a bunch of people out there that resent that stuff. But I will defend Duke. They have earned that brand. They have busted their tail. They've done things right. And I don't always agree with them, but it is without question, outside of Notre Dame in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the most elegant and respected brand and important brand in college sports.